Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be covering the Chapter 2 questions from the Investment Banking, Valuation, Leveraged Buyouts, and Mergers and Acquisitions 2nd edition textbook by Joshua Rosenbaum and Joshua Pearl. It is a fantastic textbook covering really all the different technical techniques that are used in the investment banking industry. So if you're preparing for an investment banking interview or an equity research interview, this is a great overview from a beginner's and intermediate perspective. And so in Chapter 2, I already made a video really covering the entire chapter. The textbook talks about the precedent transactions analysis, and it covers it from start to finish, all of the different considerations that you need to make, all of the different multiples that are used, and finally how to draw the implied valuation range to advise for a client, or to conclude that it's either a buy or a sell, right? And so in this video, I'm going to be going over some quick questions about the topics that we talked about in that video. So I would recommend that you first watch that video and then come back to this video and really try the questions out for yourself. And so I'll run through them. You can kind of pause and stop the video to really try them out yourself, but I'm just going to quickly go through them and kind of give you guys the answers. Okay, so let's get started. So question 1, which of the following is not a traditional source when creating an initial list of comparable acquisitions? Well, M&A databases are for sure a great source of information. The target M&A history is another great source of information to really determine, if that company is acquiring in that space, then they probably are comparing their performance to those related companies. Credit reports, not so much. I mean, that's more with regards to the financial strength and position of the company itself rather than its comparable acquisitions. And also fairness opinions are another great value of information when it comes to comparable acquisitions. So the answer in this case, what is not a traditional source, would be C, credit reports. Now, question 2. Which questions would a banker typically ask to better understand the context of an M&A deal? Well, let's go through them. 1. Was the acquirer a strategic buyer or a financial sponsor? That is a very important question. I actually decided, I was reading the textbook and I stopped midway and I made a video specifically to define the difference between a strategic buyer and a financial buyer, or a financial sponsor. So I recommend that you go and check out that video as well if you really want to learn in depth about the strengths and differences of the two. But that is a very important question because it defines how much a premium is paid for the deal. Number 2, was the nature of the deal friendly or hostile? That's another big question to ask because it really depends on the environment in which the transaction occurred in. If it was friendly or hostile, then there are different things, and usually in a hostile bid, the acquisition premium is significantly higher. Number 3, was the target sold through an auction process or negotiation sale? That's another big question, and I think it really defines the premium that is paid for a deal. And 4, what were the buyers and sellers' motivations for the transaction? And that kind of ties into the strategic buyer or financial sponsor. So actually all 4 of these are important questions to ask in the context of an M&A deal. So the answer would be D. Okay, question 3. In addition to a high purchase price, what other factors are important to the seller in assessing the value of a proposal? 1, the speed of execution. That is very important as the owner or a senior manager of that business. You want to make sure that, if you are exposing your business to the transaction process, you want to make it as quick as possible because investment bankers are very costly and advisory services can really be a big drain of finances. 2, the date of management presentation. Not so much. I mean, maybe from a personal perspective, but not for the company itself. Also, certainty of completion, that's a big question. You don't want to go or jump into these discussions and find out that really there's no way this business is going to be approved by shareholders, and at the same time for the regulatory approvals needed. So maybe even the regulatory officials will look at that deal and they'll be like, hell no, we're not going to let you approve this deal. So at the end of the day, those are really important questions and considerations in a high purchase price. So 1, speed of execution, 3, certainty of completion, and 4, regulatory approvals needed. So those are the 3 in really assessing the value of a proposal. So the answer would be 1, 3, 4, 1, 3, 4. So it'd be D. D would be the answer. Okay, question 4. Which of the following is not contained in a merger proxy? 1, terms of the transaction. B, the description of the financial analysis underlying the fairness opinion. C, the definitive purchase and sale agreement, and D, the target's customer list. Oh, this is a relatively easy question because, D just does not make sense. But going over that, the proxy statement contains a summary of the background in terms of the transaction, a description of the financial analysis underlying the fairness opinions of the financial advisors, and a copy of the definitive purchase sale agreement, and a summary and pro forma financial data if applicable. The target's customer list is not contained in the proxy statement. So the proxy statement is a very important source of information for investors and analysts researching the transaction itself to determine whether the terms are fair for both the buyer and the seller. Okay. Question 5. A target has blank days to respond to a tender offer and file a blank. This 100%, you need to watch the video to know the answer to this. I don't expect a lot of people to know, but that's how detailed we get into it. We really go down to the nitty-gritty so that even the most technical questions you're able to understand. And that's really important, especially when you're going into an investment banking interview. You want to understand the processes correctly, because if you don't and you just regurgitate information, eventually you're going to get caught. Okay, so the answer to this is there are 10 days to respond to a tender offer, and then the company, the board of directors for the target company, then responds through a Schedule 14D9. So the answer would be B. Okay, so in a tender offer, an acquirer mails an offer to purchase to the target shareholders and files a Schedule TO, a tender offer. The target must then file a Schedule 14D9 within 10 business days of the announcement of the tender. The Schedule 14D9 contains a recommendation from the target's board of directors to the target's shareholders on how to respond to the tender offer. It's a very important part of the process. So question 6, which exchange ratio is most common in a stock for stock transaction? This is another video that I actually have on my channel separately. Once again, I stopped midway in the chapter and I'm like, this is important, because in stock for stock transactions, there are two different types of exchange ratios. There's the floating and there's the fixed. So it's either floating or C, fixed. So there's no such thing as non-floating. There's no such thing as linear. So it's either one of these two. And really, the fixed is much more favorable for the acquirer, and the floating is a fixed price, so it's much more favorable for the target. But at the end of the day, the acquirer is making that acquisition, right? So they're looking in their interest. They're thinking in their interest. So C is the correct answer. A fixed exchange ratio is most common, and floatings are not as common. I would say maybe 10-15% of the time a transaction might be proposed through a floating exchange stock for stock ratio. Okay, but I do recommend that you watch that stock for stock transaction video. It's a great overview. It's pretty short, should be like 8-9 minutes, and it really covers everything you need to know about that. And if not, you can just watch the chapter 2 video to really see a fuller example as well. So question 7, what is the exchange ratio if an acquirer agrees to exchange 0.5 shares of its stock for every 2 shares of the target stock? So the exchange ratio is essentially what the target gets for what they give up, right? That's how you can frame it. So really, if they're receiving 0.5 shares and they're giving up every 2 shares, then really you just divide 0.5 by 2, and that is 0.25. So the answer would be 0.25. And once again, if you haven't watched the video and you haven't seen the formulas that we use when we're calculating stock for stock transactions, I recommend that you watch that video because it's quite important. Okay, question 8. When is a floating exchange ratio offer most commonly used? So we talked about fixed, it's much more common. But when an acquirer offers a floating exchange ratio, the acquirer A is significantly larger, because then it's not as risky, because a floating exchange ratio is a fixed value target, right? With a stock for stock, the risk with stock for stock transactions is that, they offer, say I'll give you 0.5 of my shares for every 1 of your shares. Well, if the value of my share price either increases or decreases, then the value of the deal overall increases or decreases, right? With a floating exchange ratio, that ratio floats, whereas the overall acquisition price is fixed, and therefore it's much smarter for the acquirer to be significantly larger than the target. Okay. Question 9. Calculate the implied premium paid, assuming the target has an unaffected share price of $50 and the offer price is $67.50 per share. Well, this is just a simple calculation of the premium paid for the company, and we can kind of just calculate it right now. So 67.5 divided by 50 minus 1, 35% premium. So it'd be D. D would be the answer, right? And that's how you calculate the calculation. That's not the hard part. Now, question 10, why is time lag a potential weakness when using precedent transactions? So let's first understand what a time lag is. The time lag is essentially the time between when we are conducting our analysis and when the transaction was proposed or completed. So if we're looking at a comparable transaction 10 years ago versus a comparable transaction a year ago, the transaction a year ago will be much more reflective and much more valuable than that one which is 10 years ago. And that's essentially what a time lag is. And so when we're looking at, what the answer is for question 10, I'll kind of just go straight to it. It's B. Precedent transactions, by definition, took place in the past, and it is possible that they do not reflect prevailing market conditions. So that's really what the risk with time lag is. And especially if you're looking at a very niche industry where there are not a lot of transactions, and you have maybe one or two that occurred many, many years ago, then it becomes much more difficult to really offer a strong precedent transactions analysis, because you're basing your analysis on things that happened years ago in different market conditions. Okay, so B is the answer. Question 11. What are the primary types of synergies? Very important question. Well, one, revenue, transaction, not so much. Cost is another big synergy, and time is not a synergy. So the answer would be 1 and 3. So the answer would be B. So synergies refer to the expected cost savings, growth opportunities, and other financial benefits, right? So transaction and time are not financial benefits. So they are the financial benefits that occur as a result of the combination of two businesses. They can be broken down into revenue and cost synergies. Okay? Question 12. So assuming a stock for stock transaction, determine the exchange ratio. So the official formula of exchange ratio is essentially the offer price per share divided by the acquirer's share price. So if I am Apple and the target is BlackBerry, if BlackBerry, and let's put numbers to this, look at the actual example. If the BlackBerry share price is 15 and the acquirer Apple's share price is 30, then you just divide 15 by 30, and that is a 0.5. So the exchange ratio in this case would be 0.5. Question 13, what is the premium paid for the target? So this is similar to the previous question for the premium. So we just look at the offer price per share for the target, which is 15, and the unaffected share price is 12. And so we can just calculate the premium, right? So 15 divided by 12 minus 1 is 25. So 25% would be the premium, so it'd be D. D is the answer. Now, question 14, calculate the target's offer value and enterprise value. So here we're combining a little bit of what we learned in chapter 1 about the treasury stock method, because we have to now calculate, in order to calculate the offer value and the enterprise value, we have to calculate the target's fully diluted shares, which includes basic shares outstanding, which we know is 250, plus in-the-money options and warrants, plus in-the-money convertible securities. Now, in this example, we don't have any convertible securities, but we do have in-the-money exercisable options, right? Which is, we have outstanding options of 10 and at an exercise price of $10, right? So we have to use the treasury stock method to calculate the new incremental shares in order to calculate the fully diluted shares. Okay, so to find equity value, we need to multiply fully diluted shares outstanding by the offer price. We can use the treasury stock method, the TSM, to calculate the new shares after outstanding options are exercised. So we have outstanding options of 10, an exercise price of $10. The proceeds are 100, so 10 times 10 is 100. So that's how much money the company is receiving from exercising these options. And then, the assumption under the TSM method is that they're taking those proceeds and then buying back shares at the current market value to reduce the dilution effect of exercising options. So they take those $100 in proceeds and divide it by the current share price and net of the amount that is issued. So we're dividing it, in this case, its options are worth $150, and the difference between the proceeds and what the options are worth is $50, and we divide that by the current share price to get net new shares of 3.33. So in this case, we just our fully diluted shares outstanding would be 253.33 shares, and then we can calculate the numbers, right? So adding basic plus new shares gives us fully fully diluted shares of 253.3 shares. We can now find the equity value. In addition, by adding target net debt, there's no minority interest or preferred stock, we can get enterprise value. So to calculate the offer value, the equity value, we take the fully diluted shares outstanding and multiply it by the offer price of 15 to get an offer value of 3,800. And then we can add net debt, considering the enterprise value formula, which is equity value plus net debt plus minority interest plus preferred stock. And because there's no minority interest in preferred stock, then all we're doing is we're adding net debt. So we add that 1,000 in net debt to the equity value of 3,800 to get enterprise value of 4,800. So the answer among these options is A, 3,800 or $3 billion. $3 billion in equity and $4.8 billion in enterprise value. Now, question 15, calculate the target's last 12 months enterprise value to equity value, EBITDA, LTM enterprise value to EBITDA, right? So we already calculated the enterprise value of the company, which is 4,800, right? And we now know that LTM EBITDA is 650. So all we have to do is really just input it into the calculator. So 4,800 divided by 650 to get rounded EBITDA EV to EBITDA multiple of 7.4x. So the answer is D, 7.4x. And that's pretty much it. If you do have any questions with regards to any of the questions that we talked about in this video, please comment below and I'll be sure to give you a very lengthy answer, really explaining everything that you need to know. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe to the channel. I really am trying to build up the channel. I'd appreciate any support. I got hour-long videos and I'm working hard, and I really would appreciate any support that you guys can give me. And as always, hopefully this video helped and you guys have a great day. Thank you so much for watching.